The oldest living scholar of fascism, who specialized in the study of it, Robert Paxton, has declared Donald Trump and the Trumpist movement fascism. In the New York Times Magazine, as recently as October 23rd, 2024, written by Elizabeth Serosky. In the title, it says Fascism. A little historian changed his mind. Robert Paxton thought that the label was overused, but now he's alarmed by what he sees in global politics, including Trumpism. The historian Paxton spent January 6, 2021 glued to his television. Paxton was in his apartment in Upper Manhattan when he watched a mob march toward the Capitol, overrun the security barriers, and then the police cordoned and break inside. Many of the crowd with the wore red mega baseball caps, while some sported bright orange beanies, signaling their membership in the Proud Boys, a far-right extremist group. A few were dressed more fantastically. Who are these characters in camouflage and antlers? He wondered, but was absolutely riveted by it. Paxton told me when I met him this summer in that home in Hudson Valley, I don't imagine such a spectacle was possible. He is 92 years old by the time of this written article. He's one of the foremost American experts on fascism and perhaps the greatest living scholar of mid-20th century European history. His 1972 book, Vichy, France, Al Gore and the New Order, 1940 to 1944, traced the internal political forces that led the French to collaborate with the Nazi occupiers and compelled France to reckon fully with its wartime past. The work seemed freshly relevant when Donald Trump closed in on the Republican nomination in 2016, with the articles comparing American politics with Europe's in the 1930s began to proliferate in American press. Michiko Kakutani, then the chief book critic of the New York Times, was among one of the first to set the tone. She sent a review on the new Hitler biography into the Finney Bell allegory about a clown and a dumbhead, an egomaniac and a pathological liar, with a talent for reading and exploring weaknesses. In the Washington Post, the conservative commentator Robert Kagov wrote, "This is how fascists come to America, not with jackboots and salutes, but with a television huckster." In a column for a French newspaper published in 2017 in Harper's Magazine, Pastor urged to retrain. "We should hesitate before applying the most toxic labels," he warned. Paxton acknowledged that Trump's scold and his judging jaw recalls Mussolini's absurd theatrics, and Trump was fond of blaming foreigners and despised minorities for national decline. These, Paxton wrote, were all staples of fascism, but the word was used with such abandon. Everything you don't like is fascist, he said. He has allowed his power to illuminate. Despite the superficial resemblance, there are way too many dissimilarities. The first fascist, he wrote, promised to overcome national weakness and declared by strengthening the state, subordinating interests of the individual to those of the community. Trump and his crony wanted, by contrast, to subordinate community interests to individual interests, at least those of the wealthy individuals. After Trump took office, alternate articles, papers, and books either embraced the fascist analogy as used and necessary, or criticized as misleading and unhelpful. The polemic was so unrelenting, especially on social media, that it come to be known among historians as the fascist debate. Paxton had by this point been retired for more than a decade from Columbia University, where he was a professor of history for more than 30 years. He didn't pay attention to, let alone participate in online debates. On January 6th, provide to the Perry point. For American historian, a 20th century Europe, it was hard not to see the insurrection echoes of Mussolini's black shirts who marched on Rome in 1922 and took over the capital, or the violent riot at the French Parliament in 1934 by the veterans and the far-right groups who sought to disrupt the swearing in of a new left-wing government. But the analogies were less important, and what Paxton recorded is the transformation of Trumpism itself. The turn to violence was so explicit, so overt, and so international that you had to change the way you say about it, he told. "It just seemed to me that a new language was necessary because a new things has happened." When an editor at Newsy reached out to Paxton, he decided to publicly declare a change of mind. In a column that appeared online on January 11, 2021, Paxton wrote that the evasion of the capital removes by objection to the fascist label. Trump's open encouragement of civil violence to overturn the election crossed a red line, he went on. The label now seemed not just acceptable, but necessary. Until then, most scholars arguing in favor of fascism label were not specialists. Paxton was, to whom for years has been making the case that Trump is an equal fascist and took process scholar as a vindication. He probably did more than one piece that all these other historians who written over his books since 2016 appear on television and have who have over 300,000 Twitter followers, says Daniel Stedford Jenkins, an assistant professor at Wesleyan and an editor of the recent collection of essays Did It Happen Here? Samuel Monia, a historian at Yale University, said to the site, Paxton is to make an authority claim, you can't beat it. This summer, I asked Paxton if nearly 4 years later he stood by his pronouncement. Cautiously but forthright, he told me that he doesn't believe using the word is politically helpful in any way. But he confirmed the diagnosis. It's bubbling up from below in a very worrisome way, and very much like the original fascism. Paxton said, "It's a real thing. It really is." Calling someone or something fascist is a supreme expression of moral revulsion and emotional impulses. It is difficult to resist. The temptation to draw parallels between Trump and the fascist leader of the 20th century is understandable. The British historian Richard Evans wrote in 2021 how better to express the fear, loathing, and contempt that Trump arose in liberals than by comparing to the ultimate political evil. The words get lobbed at the left too, including by Trump at Democrats. But fascism does have a special meaning, and in the last few years, the debate has turned into two questions. Is it an accurate description of Trump, and is it useful? Most commentators fall into one of the two categories: a yes to the first, and a second, or no, or do both. Paxton is a somewhat unique case, posing that as a yes and no. I still think it's a word that generates more head than light, Paxton said, as we set out looking out over the Hudson River. It's kind of like setting off a paintball. Paxton, who speaks with the lit of mid-century TV announcer or a studio star, is an elegant resort man with a dapper swoop of hair, long comb white face aged with deep lines. He and his wife, the artist Sarah Plimpton, moved out of New York City where they lived for 50 years to Columbia campus only a few years ago. He told me what he saw on January 6th would continue to affect him. It's been hard to accept the other side as fellow citizens with legitimate grievance. That's not to say he clarified that there are legitimate grievances to be had, but the politics of addressing them has changed. He believed that Trumpism has become something that is not Trump doing in a curiosity way. Paxton said, I meant it because of his rallies. It wasn't set organized out to create these things. They just germinated, as far as I can tell. Whatever Trumpism is coming from below as a mass phenomenon, and the leaders are running to keep ahead of it, Paxton said. That's how he noted Italian fascism and Nazism began. When Mussolini and Hitler capitalized on the mass discontent after World War One, it gained power. Este, Focusing on leaders, and Paxton has long held is a distraction when trying to understand fascism. What you ought to be studying is the milieu of which they grew, Paxton said, for which fascism take root. There need to be an opening in the political system, which is the loss of traction by the traditional party, he said. This need to be a real breakdown. Paxton was not quite 40 when he published his groundbreaking work about Vichy France. In demonstration, the French leader actively sought collaboration with the Nazis, then much of the public initially supported them, among other things. It showed that the country's wartime experience was not simply imposed but arose from its own internal political and cultural crisis, a dysfunctional government, and perceived social decadence. Later in his career, Paxton had to write comparatively about fascist movement across Europe in the 1920s and 30s, what caused them to grow and win power, as in Italy and Germany, or to fail, as in England and Mexico. Which, fun fact, although all fascist movements that developed throughout the world between the 1910s to the 1930s, the oldest fascist movements slash political parties that were founded in countries where they never became full fascist governments was Mexico and in the UK. In Mexico, that we have called the Gold Short, which coincidentally the majority of them were Macho Pincha soldiers, Pancho Villa soldiers, and never did anything. They tried to do like a military coup, but barely lasted 10 minutes. And then you have England, which was even a more powerful movement than the Mexican one, with over 30 plus thousand members, but ended in a street fight by the anti-fascist resistance. The world has responded to what he saw as a fundamental misconception on the part of some of his peers, who've defined fascism as an ideology. It seems doubtful, Paxton wrote in the New York Times Review of Books in 1994, though some common intellectual position can be defining character of the movement, the value action above thought, the instinct of blood above reason, duty to the community above the individual freedom, and natural particularism above any kind of universal value. Is fascism and isn't at all? Fascism, he argued, was prepared more by feeling the ideas. Fascist movements succeed. Paxton wrote, environment which liberal democracy stood accused of producing division decline. That remained true not just of the United States today, but also Europe, especially France, when the far-right National Rally Party of Marine Le Pen is inched closer and closer to power with each election cycle. Le Pen was gone to considerable length to insist that there is no common ground between her movement and the Vichy regime, Paxton told me. For me, the contrary she seemed to copy some of the same spaces within the political system. She carries forward similar issues about authority, internal order, field decline, and of the other. 50 years later, 50 French was published. It remained a remarkable book. It offers jarring tales of the material and practical support provided by Nazi Germany by France, the largest supplier of the German war economy of both food and foreign male laborers in all occupied Europe. But it also illuminates with clarity and degree of even-handedness that feels astonishing today. The complete historical political tradition, progressive versus Catholic traditionalism, Republic versus ancient regime that create the turbulent condition which Vichy will prevail and continue to drive French politics today. Vichy French, published in 1973, profoundly shocked the nation's self-image, and Pax is still something of a household name. His pictures appear in some French high school history textbooks. He often comes up with the misogyny of French politics. Eric Somore, a far-right pundit and one-time presidential candidate, was sought to sanitize far-right policy in France by rehabilitating Vichy as attacked Paxton and the historical consensus he represents. In Vigifest, he asserted that these occupiers and occupier alike suggested there are some crude times when the same nations display value if they one must disobey the state. France, after 1940, was one of those times. The book was a national scandal, Back said. People were quite horrified. Praxis adversaries called him a nerd. He was an American and had no history of his own. I said, oh boy, you don't know anything, Paxton told me. Paxton was born in 1932 and raised in Lexington, a small town in Appalachian Hills of Western Virginia. As he wrote in the introduction of Vichy France, when he was raised in 2001, his own family still brooded a century later about his decline after the death of my great-grandfather in the Battle of Chancellorsville in May 3, 1863. Paxton's father was a lawyer, published a local newspaper. His family was liberal, but now that they could see the substantial house on a hilltop, and they had belonged to his father's grandfather, a brigadier general in the Confederate Army, occupied by another family since 1865. The bitterness of the defeat South tended to express itself in the study of history, he wrote. My fellow Southerners spent their time researching, debating, commemorating, rewriting, and even reenacting their own 4-year war of Southern independence. Surely he thought he would find friends equally as fascinated with the history of Vichy. Patrick chose to study European history to get away from American history, especially the South, which felt rather solidifying, he said. His parents sent him to Exeter for his last 2 years of high school, but instead of going to Harvard or Yale, he decided to return to Lexington to attend Washington and Lee University, like generations of Texans before him. After graduating, he won a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford, did 2 years of military service, working for the Navy leadership in Washington, and then went to Harvard to earn a PhD. In 1960, he arrived in France to begin searching for his dissertation. Paris at the time was brimming with rumors of a pending coup by French generals who were fighting to keep Algeria, then a colony. French and who were angry that the government in Paris was not supporting them. The notion of an army officer class that was loyal to the nation but not to its current government was, to Pax's resonate one. He wanted to write about how the officers were trained, but when he went to search the military academy's archive, he was told they were bombed in 1944. A French advisor suggested that he focused on the Vichy period, a time of great confusion, but he had been only 15 years at the end of the war, and France had a rule about keeping archive closed for 50 years. Fortunately, Pasteur also spoke German, so there was another resource, the German archive, which had been captured by Allied forces and made accessible on microfilm. As he sorted through the documents, Paxton began to question the narratives about Vichy that became dominant after the war. French held that Nazis maintained total dominion over France, and Vichy was doing only what was necessary to protect the nation while waiting for liberation, the so-called double game. But it did not correspond to the records. What I was finding was a total mismatch, Paxton told. The French popular narratives of the war have been that they all been resistors, even only if they're thugs, and the archives were just packed with people clamoring. Defense companies wanted to construct things for the German army. People wanted to have jobs. People wanted to have social contracts. In his book, Paxton argued that the book and the devastation of France's 1940 military defeat, by which many French blamed for 4 years of socialist government and the cultural liberalization that preceded it, had primed France to accept, even supported, its collaboration as government. After World War I, France was a power in decline, squeezed between the mass production of the United States and the strength of the newly formed Soviet Union. Many French citizens saw the loss of French prestige as a symptom of social decay. These sentiments created by the condition of the Vichy government to bring about what they called the National Revolution, an ideological transformation of France that included anti-Jews laws and eventual deportation. Every major French publication and broadcast reviewed the book. One review sarcastically congratulated Paxton for solving French's problem. Another offered a hearty cheer to his academic sitting in the chair on the other side of the Atlantic. 30 years later, many commentators, however, recognized that perhaps only an outsider could have accomplished what he did. It was true that the post-war narrative was already being publicly challenged. The Sorrow and the Pity, a series 1969 documentary about French collaboration, and the controversial part of a Vichy police leader raised questions among the younger generation about what actually happened during the period, but it was Preston who legitimized change that were in the process of happening in French society. Henry Russo, a French historian and expert on Vichy, told him he had the allure of a Hollywood star. He was the perfect American for the French. Paxton's scholarship became a foundation for an entire new field of research that would transform French official memory of World War II from one of the resistance to one of complicity. It came to be known as the Paxtonian Revolution. Yet even at the time, Paxton was tradition about the issues and misuse of fascism. In Vichy French, he announced that while past the halfway point of his book, the term fascist was hardly appeared. This was not he continued to deny any kinship between Vichy French and the other regimes of the 20th century, but because of the word fascist has been debased into epithet, making it less and less useful tool for analyzing the political movement of our times. To describe the French case as fascism, Paxton went on was to dismiss the whole occupation spirit as something alien to French life, an aberration unthinkable without foreign troops imposing their wills. This, he warned, was a mental shortcut that concealed the deep taboos linking Fijian policy to the major conflicts of the Third Republic, that is, to everything that came before. In determining what counts as fascism, many historians will rely on parameters that came from Paxton through the 1960s and 70s. Historians argue about how to best understand and define it. Paxton wasn't much involved in those debates, but by the early 90s, he found himself dissatisfied with their conclusions. Their scholarship focused on ideas, ideologies, and political programs. I found it very bizarre how every time someone set out to publish a book or write an article about fascism, they began with the program, Paxton told when he met again at Le Monde, a French bistro near the Columbia campus. The program was usually transactional, he said, over our very French lunch of omelettes and frites. It was there they try again to followers at a certain period, but it certainly didn't determine what they did. In 1998, Paxton published a highly influential journal titled The Five Stages of Fascism, which became the basis for his canonical 2004 book, The Anatomy of Fascism. In the article, Paxton argued that one problem in trying to define fascism arose from the ambiguous relationship between doctrine and action. Scholars and intellectuals naturally wish to classify movements according to what their leaders say they believe, but it was a mistake, he said, to treat fascism as it was comparable to 19th century doctrines like liberalism, conservatism, and socialism. Fascism does not rest explicitly upon an elaborate philosophical system, but rather upon popular feelings about master races, their unjust lot, the rightful predominance over inferior people, he wrote in The Anatomy of Fascism. In contrast to other isms, the truth was whether permeate the new fascist man and woman to dominate others, and whether what made choice before people triumph. Whether promised fascists made early on, Pax argued, were only distantly related to what they did once they gained and exercised power. If they made the necessary compromise with existing elites to establish dominance, they demonstrate what he called a contempt for culture, which they simply ignored their original beliefs and acted in ways quite contrary to them. Fascism, Paxton argued, the best thought is a political behavior, one marked by obsessive preoccupation with community decline, humiliation, or victimhood. The book, already a staple of college syllabuses, became increasingly popular during the Trump years. To many, the echoes were unmistakable. When Paxton announced he changed his mind about Trump in his 2021 Newsweek column, he continued to emphasize that the historical circumstances were profoundly different. Nevertheless, the column had a significant impact on the ongoing and newly fierce debate over whether Trump could be labeled fascist. Ron Ben-Ghiat, a historian of Italian fascism at New York University, said that the column's importance lay not only in the messenger, but also in marking January 6th as a radical event in his 1997 and 1998 article. Paxton outlined how fascism evolved either toward entropy or radicalization. When somebody allies with extremists to get to power and sustain them, you have the logic of radicalization. And what we saw this happen. Not everyone was persuaded. Samuel Mion, the young historian, told him impossible not to admire Paxton. He's a scholar's scholar. while almost making a huge political difference. But he still disagreed. In 2020, Moore argued that in the New York Review of Books, the problem with comparison is that they can prevent us from seeing novelty. In particular, Moore was concerned about the same mental stroke that Paxton warned against more than 50 years earlier. I wanted to say, well, wait, it's a Republican Party, along with the Democratic Party, that led to Trump through neoliberalism and wars abroad. Mio told him it was just seeing that there's a distinctiveness of this phenomenon that may make it not very helpful to use the analogy. I personally, as Gamingfan, would disagree with this because the first neoliberal state in the world was Chile during the Pinochet regime, and Pinochet was a fascist. So neoliberalism and fascism go hand in hand. But carry on. Michael Kimmage, a historian at Catholic University who specialized in the history of the Cold War and worked at the State Department, told him that even when it comes to Putin, a cool candidate for a fascist label, the use of the word often generates a noxious curiosity. It becomes the enemy of nuance. Kimmage said, the only thing that provides a predictive value in foreign policy in any experience is regime type. Kimmage said, he argued that Putin has not behaved as a full-blown fascist because his regime depends on maintaining order and stability. The fact how he wages war it should affect how the United States responds too. But for those who use the label to describe Trump, it is useful precisely because it has offered a predictive framework. It is a kind of hypothesis John Keynes, the author of the new book of the radical right in the 1990s, told me. What does it tell us about the next step that Trump may take? I would say that as a theory of Trumpism is one of the better ones. No one expects Trump to look like Nazism or follow a specific timeline, but some anticipation using three paramilitary forces might do some kind of extravagant attempt to seize power. Ganasel, well, that's what he said. Some of the most adherent proponents of fascism label have been taken quite a bit further. Yale historian Timothy Snyder offers lessons on fighting Trumpists lifted from totalitarian Germany in the 1930s in the way that many other historians find unhelpful. But the debate is not just an intellectual one, it's also about actual tactics. Some of the far left accuse prominent figures in the political sector, whom Yale calls Cold War liberals, of wielding the label against Trump to get them to fall in line with the Democratic Party despite having strong differences with parts of his platform. Steinmus Jenkins told him that he objects to the attitude that what matters is winning. So let's create an enemy. Let's call it fascism for the purpose of galvanizing consensus. And this kind of politics, Kimmich note, also comes with its own dangers. Something wavy that banner, you're fascists on the other side, and we, the valiant anti-fascists, is a way of just not thinking about how one as an individual, as part of the class, might be contributing to the problem, he says. Paxton has won no weight on the issue since Newsweek column, spending much of his time immersing in life's second passion, birdwatching, at his home in Hudson Valley. I read back to him of his earlier definition of fascism, which he described as a mass anti-liberalism, anti-communism movement, radical in its willingness to employ force, distinct not only from enemies of the left but also from rivals on the right. I asked him if he thought it describes Donald Trump. It does, he said. Nonetheless, he remained committed to his yes-no paradigm of accuracy and usefulness. I'm not pushing the term because I don't think it does the job very well now, Paxton told him. I think there was ways of being more explicit about the specific dangers Trump represents. When they met, Kamala Harris just assumed the Democrat nominee. I think is going to be very dicey. He said, if Trump wins, it's going to be awful. If he loses, it's going to be awful too. He scored his brain for an apt historical analogy, but struggled to find one. Hitler was not elected. He nodded, but legally appointed by the conservative president, Paul von Hindenburg. One theory, he said, is that if Hitler hadn't been talked into choosing Hitler, the bubble had already burst and you could have come up with an ordinary conservative, not a fascist, as the new Chancellor of Germany. And I think that's the plausible counterfactual. Hitler was on the downward slope. In Italy, Mussolini was also legitimately appointed. The king chose him, Paxton said. Mussolini didn't really had to march on Rome. Trump's power, Paxton suggests, appears to be different. Trump phenomenon looks like it has much more solid social base, Paxton said, which neither Hitler nor Mussolini would have. And there you go. In a very indirect way, the oldest living by the time I'm recording this video scholar of fascism declared Trump and his movement fascism. All the other scholars who were older than him died before witnessing Trump's first presidency, or the ones that did never wrote anything about it.